All right. So, time to do our last world region, and that's going to be Europe. So, you might be surprised to find out that this is the last major world region we're going to do. And that's because, in many ways, in period one, this is the world region that's the least important to us. And important means influential. Europe is not on major patterns of interaction, so they're not trading things. So they are not exposed to or receiving the ideas of other more advanced groups of people. Now, this is a really important thing for us to note in this story. A lot of us think of European domination when we think of Europe. That has not happened yet. So what we need to do today is look at where is Europe coming from before the global expansion that we think of with Europe with the start of the Columbian Exchange, which starts in our next Europe. So Europe is by no means top dog in this time period. That's really important to know. So the question becomes, why is that? Well, to start with, you don't see political centralization in Europe in this time period. And by political centralization, what I mean is you don't see big, strong, powerful, united empires exerting power over large regions and actively promoting trade. We say in this class that Europe is decentralized. Power is locally held. If you look at this map of political states in Europe in 1200, you would see that Europe is fragmented. And these tiny states are frequently fighting with one another, trying to gain control of one another. And one of the problems with this time period is frequent warfare in Europe. Now, politically, smaller regional kingdoms, I just said that, with no centralized power. There's decentralization. There is no one strong uniting power in Europe. Most of these kingdoms are monarchies, and it's a traditional monarchy. Normally, when the king dies, the king's oldest son is going to replace him. You're going to see the manorial and the feudal systems practice. I'm going to give you more about this going forward, but especially the feudal system is going to shape Europe in this time period. In many ways, it's going to hold it back. This time period will have lots of conflict between these small states trying to gain power at one another's expense. And this is going to lead to very, very, very weak monarchs. Monarchs do not hold power over vast amounts of territory like an emperor over an empire would. Now, economically, they're not engaged in interregional trade. Because of this, economically, they're behind. The main focus economically of Europe is going to be subsistence farming, growing enough food to feed yourself by the lowest class of people, a special group of peasants that we call serfs. Serfs are somewhere between a slave and a peasant. In name, they're not slaves. In name, they have freedom. However, they're tied to the land on which they're born. They're never allowed to leave it, and they have to always serve a local lord and are at his beck and call. So it's not quite right to call them a slave, but they're certainly not free in the sense of what we would think of. And remember this, a peasant is someone who just grows food for subsistence. So the serfs are a type of peasant in Europe. Now, because Europe is not engaged in long distance trade, you're not going to see lots of urban areas in Europe. Remember, cities are centers of trade. Because of this, you don't see the same sort of economic advances in Western Europe, especially you see in other places. So the food is grown by the semi-coerced labor we talked about. called the serfs, and people worked and lived in the manorial system. So here's a typical example of what you would see in a manor. Each manor would have a lord. The lord ruled over the territory. It could be several hundred acres of land. Frequently, the lord had a manor. Now, we might call this a castle, but some sort of armed defensive fortification on this land. The serfs that were born on the land, they had to provide labor and food to the lord of the manor. And in return for that, the lord of the manor was supposed to protect them. On this territory, you would see everything that everyone needed to subsist. You'd see a flour mill. You might see a small Catholic church. Maybe there are some serfs who are allowed to become skilled craftsmen, a blacksmith, and they would have some special privileges. But typically, most people who lived in this system were serfs, and they are growing food to try to feed everyone who lived in the manor. The serfs barely had a subsistence, and the lords could have great wealth and power. The religion in Europe is Christian. Now, there is a special and specific type of Christian called Roman Catholic. We are not going to delve too much into the Roman Catholic religious beliefs, but Europe is the center of Christianity during this time period, which does not mean that there's not Christian minorities in other world regions like the Middle East. We talked about Christians living in the Muslim world, and like in North Africa, again, in the Muslim world. And you definitely had some Christians make it as far east as China, like Marco Polo. But this is going to be the center of Christian belief in this time period. This is the one region of the world where the predominant religion is Christianity. And again, most Christians in Europe are going to practice a form of Christianity called Roman Catholicism, which we're going to talk about more in the next unit. Now, you do see Muslims in Spain. By this time period, the Muslim grip in Spain was slipping, and Christian kingdoms are starting to drive Islam out of Spain. By the end of this unit, most of Spain is in control of Christian hands, and Islam does not control nearly as much of Spain as it had in previous time periods. But it would be wrong to say that there is not Islam in Europe at this time, because there still are Muslims in Spain. They're just a small group at this point. The few areas that have cities will have Jewish diasporic communities. You will see Jewish diasporic communities anywhere that you see urban areas and trade in this unit, like in the Middle East, like in North Africa. We had said that Muslims had always been very tolerant of Jewish communities. And Judaism is the religion that both Christianity and Islam originally stems from. So all three of these religions are related. Now, this is what you see with the feudal system. This is a system that has very little social mobility and a very clear hierarchy. In the head of the kingdom, you have a king. In Europe, it's almost always male, which means that once again, we're dealing with another group of people who practice patriarchy. Under them are the lords. The lords are the ones who control the manors. It would not be uncommon for different groups of nobles to serve under the same king, but also fight one another. The class of people that fights and protects these kingdoms are the knights. The knights work for the nobles in return for gifts of land and money. And in name, the group of people who are being protected are the average everyday serfs. 90% of Europe would be a serf. And again, this class of people does not have a pathway to social mobility, to going through the class system. So in this regards, it's very similar like what you would see in India, where there's not social mobility and people do not have the chance to climb the social ladder. The group of people you're born into is the group of people you work with and spend your entire life with. And it would not have been uncommon for a serf to live their entire life on this 200 or 300 acre manor and never leave it. Now, here is the complete list of important European innovations that are created during this time period that impact the world. And we're done. Now, think about that. Europe is way, way, way behind the rest of the world. Now, by the end of this period, though, Europe has come into contact with a more important group of people of them. This is the one widespread inter-regional interaction that Europeans will have with groups of people more advanced than them. And these are called the Crusades. The Crusades are a series of holy wars led by the head of the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Pope. The goal of the Pope was to attack and retake the Christian holy city of Jerusalem in the Middle East, which by this time was under Muslim control. The Muslims had controlled Jerusalem for 500 years. Well, whipped into a religious furor, European knights and noblemen take up the cross and swear to free the city, and a series of holy wars will be fought. The first crusade was a resounding success. However, the Muslims take the city back about 70 years after it's captured. And then there will be future crusades trying to regain control of the city. And ultimately, all of those attempts are varying degrees of failure. Most crusades do not come anywhere close to trying to retake the city. However, the Crusades are very, very important in European history, not for the fact that they're trying to regain the Holy Land, but because Europeans come into contact with a more advanced group of people with them. And in coming into contact with these more advanced Muslims, European soldiers are going to bring things back from the Crusades, new ideas and new tastes developing. These new ideas that come back are going to be things like Arabic numerals. Western Europe was still using Roman numerals at this time period. It is absolutely impossible to do higher order mathematics using Roman numerals. So this is going to be an important step forward for them. Navigational technologies like the compass and the astrolabe are going to come to them for the first time. And there's going to be a demand for spices that reaches Europe for the first time. A desire to have access to pepper and exotic spices that came from India. All of these things are going to be important because they're going to pave the way for the next step in European history. What is the thing that takes Europe from being one of the lowest civilizations to one of the world's dominant civilizations in the next period? It's the voyages of Columbus. You cannot have the voyages of Christopher Columbus until you first have these technologies and these tastes reach Europe itself. So we're setting the background for the direction in which Europe is going to ultimately head. So that's it for this. That's the last notes on period 1. If you got any questions, put them in the comments. And unit test is in a couple of days, so you guys need to be sure that you're studying.